Normally, for example, the space shuttle would take off from the surface of the Earth, and somewhere between 86 kilometers above the Earth's surface and 122 kilometers above the Earth's surface. That is the point at which we call the re-entry, the entry and the re-entry. By the way, for all of the space stations that you hear of and all of the number of people that are in space right now and the space cameras, the Russian space station, all of these spacecraft and cameras and things that are circling orbiting the Earth, if you are to sit down and study how far above the Earth's surface they are, what you'll find is that most of them are at around somewhere between 350 to 450 kilometers above the Earth's surface. None of them are above 643 kilometers above the Earth's surface. Everything that goes on, all of our missions, they're all in space, yes, but none of them are outside lower Earth orbit. The moon is 384,000 kilometers away. The space station and the space shuttle and all of the spacecrafts that we've had that have been launched into space, normally what they do is they go up and they float around in Earth's orbit around about 402 kilometers above the surface of the Earth. That's where the space station is, for example. Now, so when they re-enter Earth's atmosphere somewhere around 122 kilometers above the Earth's surface, their heat shield needs to protect them from the heat of re-entry. Now, there's something entirely different involved with any sort of idea of a spacecraft traveling to the moon. A spacecraft traveling to the moon would have to, at about 643 kilometers above the Earth's surface, and continuing until about 58,000 kilometers above the Earth's surface, they would have to pass through a radiation belt called the Van Allen radiation belt. Actually, it's called the Van Allen radiation belts. The amount of heat that they would have to withstand passing through these radiation belts, the Van Allen radiation belts, is up to 35,000 degrees Celsius. So if we look back at the Apollo spacecraft, if you're still one of the people that believes that we went to the moon, you're going to have to solve that problem, because the Apollo spacecraft did not have the ability to protect an astronaut and pass through the Van Allen radiation belts. It just did not. It's a huge problem if you truly believe that we went to the moon. You're going to have to explain to people how that spacecraft could withstand from that 643 kilometers right up to 58,000 kilometers. It's quite a lengthy, it's a large zone. How on earth that spacecraft could have withstood the 35,000 degrees Celsius heat. All right, so you've been hearing over and over of the new mission to the moon being postponed over and over and over again. That is because we are continually sending spaceships through the Van Allen belt uncrewed, and it cannot withstand the radiation or the heat. This is what caused the most recent postponement. Now, here's what happened on the most recent experiment. So what happened in 2022 when the Orion returned, first of all, there were clumps coming off the heat shield. And you'll hear NASA trying to divert our attention. They're blaming it on, oh, something strange must have happened when we re-entered Earth's atmosphere. That's not the issue. We have that mastered. We know how to get into space, and we know how to re-enter Earth's atmosphere. We have heat shields to do that. They're trying to distract us from the larger issue. The larger issue is the Van Allen belts. So remember that the idea of entering and re-entering the Earth's atmosphere occurs at between 86 kilometers if you're on your way to the moon, ends at 122 kilometers. If you're coming back, you start re-entering at about 122 kilometers above the Earth's surface. This is something that NASA has mastered, okay? This is not a problem. This is what heat shields were originally for. That area, the area between 86 and 122 kilometers above the Earth's surface. That's what heat shields were made for. What we're talking about right now is the area just above about 650 kilometers, right up to 58,000 kilometers. That's where the Van Allen radiation belts are. And the amount of heat that can be, it can range up to 35,000 degrees Celsius. Okay, so at the present moment, with all the money that Elon Musk has funneled in, everything that we have, we still are unable to pass a human being in a spaceship through the Van Allen belts. We can't do it right now. So how do you explain that we were so easily able to do it over and over and over, about 7 times back in the 60s and 70s? They're lying. We didn't do it. The reason why you keep hearing about the mission to the moon being postponed over and over again is because of this very issue. So the most recent disappointment in 2022, after doubling, tripling, quadrupling the heat shield all over the Orion spacecraft, what they decided to do was take 2 mannequins that were very much like human beings in terms of organs and tissues and bones, and they placed the 2 mannequins in the Orion spacecraft. And they sent the Orion spacecraft through the Van Allen belts. And when the Orion spacecraft returned, lo and behold, here's what we had. First of all, we had a heat shield where there were clumps coming off it, and they are unsure about when that occurred. Probably, there was a weakening when they went through the belts, and then when the spacecraft re-entered Earth's atmosphere, that's probably where the damage occurred, but that's really not the problem. The problem is what happened to the mannequins. So in this study, they could only determine that there was an acute exposure to both the mannequins of at a minimum 35 MSV of radiation. And you might not think that's a lot, but that's as low as they can get it. And that's when they use this angle pass on the way back to try to reduce the radiation exposure. It's too much. And the problem is, what they noticed was the amount of radiation exposure varies depending on the angle that the spacecraft is passing through. And of course, the belts move around. They're constantly in motion. There is a career-long maximum limit of 600 MSV for every astronaut. In other words, that is a cumulative total. So to have at a minimum, to have an acute exposure of 35 to 40 is too much. So what they're doing now is they're continuing to work on the heat shields and other other things. I suppose the problem is it is not safe at the present moment. We do not have a safe way of sending astronauts to the moon because of the Van Allen radiation belts. Now, there's a huge lie on the internet. Well, there's lies all over the internet. They say that the Apollo missions were able to bypass certain belts by traveling at high speeds. Well, if that were true, we would simply do the same today. It's not true. We didn't go to the moon, and it's unlikely we're going to go there. We're going to be able to go there again because we don't have a metal or a compound that can protect us from the radiation. All we can do is double and triple it. And what they're finding is that let's say they increase it by 80%. It only reduces the radiation exposure by 30%. And of course, on top of that, they're going to have to figure out what happened to the heat shield. Why was it crumbling? Now, here is the larger problem, though. So what we had President Kennedy in the early 1960s saying, we're going to send a man to the moon and we're going to do it. We're going to build a spaceship that's going to go to the moon and we're going to do it before this decade is out. And of course, that was all out of ego. They were competing with with Russia at the time. And at the time that the Apollo mission went ahead, we had Nixon in power. We had the idea of being able to broadcast live from the moon and Nixon making a phone call to the astronauts. I mean, it's just ridiculous if you really look at it. Anyway, here is the bigger problem, though. What we have right now is a lie. And we have this lie that has now extended out. It's now in children's textbooks, in schools, in Wikipedia, and encyclopedias. It's now, it's created a very, very toxic, very immoral, unethical atmosphere. How is it that children and young people are going to be able to trust any leader, when they are being taught fallacies, they are being taught lies. And NASA is clinging to this lie, and so is the federal government. Now, in a way, NASA has sort of admitted that we haven't gone, in the sense that on some of their videos, they admit that we have never left lower Earth orbit. So that means they're admitting that we have never gone beyond 643 kilometers above the Earth's surface. So that is in a tacit way, in an indirect way, admitting that we didn't go to the moon. But at the same time, there are some people from NASA who say that we did, and what they're saying is that we just lost the technology, or we don't have the technology anymore. These are lies. This has to be cleared up. When lies are maintained like this and they are finding their way to children's textbooks, we have got to put our foot down. If you're wondering what likely happened, it's likely that they did go into outer space, as spaceships usually do, floated around in around the Earth and then re-entered. But the segment regarding the moon was likely filmed in some kind of a setting. They couldn't answer the question, for example, when they left the module and stepped out onto the moon, there were no statistics on how much air had been consumed from their tanks. There were things that were completely left blank. Anyway, I'm not even going to get into it because I am absolutely certain that we did not go to the moon. But the problem is the lie that's being disseminated. It is now trickling down into encyclopedic textbooks and into children's education, and that has to stop. It has to stop. Are there statistics, for example, on the amount of radiation that the astronauts absorbed when they passed through the Van Allen belts? Because if we did, in fact, go to the moon in the 60s and 70s, there would be detailed information on this. We would know how much radiation their body absorbed on the passages, just as we can tell how much radiation was absorbed by the mannequins when they returned in 2022. It's a huge problem, and the lie has to be retracted. The truth has to be told.